50 years. And any engineering achievement every bit as great as the interstate highway system that the Eisenhower administration built in the 1950s. And the engineering feat as great as NASA putting a man on the moon in the 1960s. What we're here to celebrate is the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, a job well done. This is actually my platform as I begin my presidency in 2022, and I look forward to promoting these achievements. And if anyone knows me, you know that one of my strong skill sets is celebrating. So I'll be able to do that for this entire year as I go throughout New England celebrating this. An actual picture of the Nashua River in the 1960s and today. Again, an engineering marvel. Now, a unique aspect of the Clean Water Act, and really the whole environmental movement, is how it started. In the 1960s, our society came up against the Vietnam War and successfully stopped that war. A lot of the young people's attention then turned to the environment. And again, that all started with Earth Day in April 1970. And then EPA was created in December 1970. And then 50 years ago, on October 18, 1972, the Clean Water Act was signed into law. And I'm proud to say that a member of New England, Senator Muskie from Maine, was the one that introduced that legislation. So once again, New England at the forefront of the environmental movement. I'd like to share with you 2 short videos. Again, when I talked about a social movement to help propel the Clean Water Act and the great success that we had. So 2 short videos showing that, and we're going to come up with the first one.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1771, Radio City Station, New York.
We got
It's the legend that made it into pop music and culture and led to decades of jokes about our city. The burning of the Cuyahoga River. Most think of it as a singular event, as sparks from a train ignited the oil and debris on the river's surface near Republic Steel and caused $100,000 in damage to 2 nearby bridges. But according to the EPA, the river caught fire at least 13 times before June 22nd, 1969, and this time was merely the last. The picture of the burning river that made the cover of Time magazine in August of 1969 was actually from 1952, when a much larger fire caused more than $1 million in damage to boats and the riverfront office building. According to Time, the 1969 fire was put out in half an hour, and no known photographs or video are known to exist. But there was some good that came out of the event that so tarnished the city's reputation. That final fire drew national attention to the problem of water pollution. Then Mayor Carl Stokes held a press conference at the site of the river fire and explained how industrial waste and the sewer system were part of the problem. He argued that a $100 million bond issue to keep raw waste out of the river would not be enough because rivers flow through so many municipalities. He pushed Congress to support federal pollution control. All of that attention led to the Clean Water Act and eventually the EPA. By 1989, the river was considered fireproof, and insects, mollusks, and other signs of life had returned.
Two great examples of social commentary creating change. How many people have seen that Indian video from back in the day? Most of the people, a lot of the young people, I'm sure, have not. I was 11 years old when that came out, and I remember that had tremendous impact on me, seeing that one. I never heard of Cuyahoga River until I started listening to Randy Newman in the 70s, and if Randy was ranting about it, I knew he was right on. So, again, two great examples. But before we start our panel discussion, I want to share with you my example of the success of the Clean Water Act. I grew up right near the Merrimack River, actually just a couple miles from where I work every day at a wastewater treatment plant now. I used to fish that river when I was a kid, and I'd catch these big-ass bass this big, but they had orange eyes, and even the scales weren't green, they were different colors. And I can remember back then, my father used to scare us saying, you fall in that river, we got to clean you with a fire hose. Those all had impacts on me. Today, I'm so proud to say the Merrimack River is literally the cleanest it's been in 150 years. You go up north of the Amherst Falls, it's full recreational. There's water skiing, there's fishing, there's boating, and one of my personal favorite, Tarzan swings all over the river banks. A tremendous comeback. Again, one of the greatest engineering feats in the past century. And to talk about this feat, we have a very distinguished panel of guests to join us. And again, a very diverse panel. We have representatives from academia, the legal world, the regulatory world, and then nuts and bolts engineering. First off, I'd like to introduce Jeanette Brown, a research assistant professor at Manhattan College, Department of Civil Engineering, and a research assistant at the Stevens Institute of Technology. In 1975, Janet started at the Stanford Water Pollution Control Authority, a position she held for more than 35 years. Jeanette's past president of WEF, I believe the only NUIA member ever to be president of WEF. Jeanette, can you please come up and join us? From the regulatory side, I'd like to bring up one of the New England men that's considered one of the most experienced, respected environmental leaders in North America. Bob Varney is the former EPA Region 1 Administrator, and before that, he was a longtime member of New Hampshire DES, where he served 10 years as Commissioner. Bob is, again, an industry leader, belongs to more organizations as I look at the alphabet soup of everything he's been awarded and belongs to. Bob Varney.
Wasn't it great to see Fred in that canoe? And
From the legal side, Lori Horridge, Executive Director, Narragansett Bay Commission, Rhode Island's largest clean water agency. She's been there 30 years and really has come up the ladder, serving several positions. First as a staff attorney, then general counsel, before moving to the business end of things as Director of Executive Affairs and Director of Administration. And she's been Executive Director since 2019. There she's managing the third and final phase of the combined sewer overflow project, the largest public work project ever undertaken in the history of Rhode Island. Lori, please join us. And last but not least is the rock star of our industry, John Sullivan. John's been Chief Engineer of the Boston Water and Sewer Commissioner for the past 30 years. Even more amazing, his dad was Chief Engineer and his grandfather was Chief Engineer. Can you imagine those conversations around the dinner table at night? John, again, an industry leader. Last 25 years, he's overseen $1 billion of work in Boston Water and Sewer. John, thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with the lightning round first. One word answer. Jeanette, how many years in the industry?
more than 40.
Bob?
42.
42?
33.
33? John?
50.
50. And I'm going to add my 41. So let me do 4, carry the 6. That's over about 175 years of industry experience up here. Let me share a story. When I was a young pup engineer with CDM, I was in the international division in Cairo, Egypt. International was where all the old CDMers came to retire. So I sat around the room, and they said, Freddie, there's about 150 years of CDM experience here. I want you to do yourself a favor, be quiet and listen. And that's what I did, and I learned a lot. And I know these distinguished panel can share a lot with you, especially the next generation. We take such pride what we've done the past 50 years with the Clean Water Act, and your generation is going to carry on that legacy, and I'm sure even excel past what we've done in the past 50 years. And with that, I'm going to dive into some questions now. If we're going to find the appropriate paper with the questions. There we go. Jeanette, when you started, could you share with us how you started in the industry, and were you even aware of the Clean Water Act when you did?
So,
And
yes,
everyone has a mic, yeah?
yep. So I started by chance, and it's like one of the things I'm most grateful for. I got out of college, I had to put myself through school, and I needed a job. And the job that was available was at the Stanford treatment plant. I knew nothing about wastewater treatment. And that got me started, and I was like a lab tech there. And it was just amazing to learn about wastewater treatment, Clean Water Act, and that was the beginning of upgrades to treatment plants to secondary treatment, construction grants program, which we'll probably talk about. But it was, I fell in love with wastewater treatment, and the love is continuing and growing.
You know, and as you know, we've talked about diversity a lot the past year. I have to think there weren't many women in the wastewater workforce at that time.
I think I was the only one in Connecticut. And it was interesting because there was like a lot of prejudices. People would say, what do you know? You're only a girl. And at that time it was called girl. You're only a girl. So, yeah, didn't give you credit for your knowledge or anything, but very few. And I can remember as women started to get more involved, and I had an opportunity to be at WEFTEC or conferences like this, how I would be so happy to meet another female that was interested in this. And nowadays, there's so many females involved, enthusiastic, high level. They've gotten up the ladder. There's really no glass ceiling in this industry.
No, a game changer for our industry. Yeah. Lori, from the legal side, how did you get into wastewater and the Clean Water Act?
By surprise. After I was in law school, I took a couple of environmental law classes. I liked them. And I got a scholarship my last year for environmental law. So when I came out, I was just, working at a firm, and a small firm. And I was looking for a part-time gig. And anybody who knows anything about Rhode Island knows you must know someone at the State House. So I called someone at the State House and said, is there any environmental thing? And they said, yeah, the Narragansett Bay Commission, which I at that time thought was the same thing as Save the Bay, which it wasn't. So I got there and I was like, wastewater treatment? What do you need a lawyer for? And they said, oh, I don't know, contracts and firing people, like all crazy stuff. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I tried it, and I was part-time for about 4 years for the Bay Commission, and then the executive director at that time was Paul Pinault, and he decided that he wanted to grow the agency, and to do that, he wanted in-house legal answers to things right away instead of like calling a firm and waiting for a week to get a memo. So he asked me to come on. I did that. I, started in the legal side, and then as the years grew on, I got more interested in the business side of it. But the same experience. I mean, certainly not. I haven't been discriminated against. I will say that. But I came along later, right? But there definitely were never as many women in the senior management. In fact, when I started, it was all men. And little by little, we got a CFO that was a woman, and then I came on, so it's gotten much better. And there's a lot of women in the agency now. In fact, our senior management now is 50-50 men and women, so.
Now, a very unique way to leadership in the industry, in a very unique perspective. Because again, one observation I made is how our industry has also changed into a business. And again, those legal aspects and those contracts are a very critical factor. Bob, how did you come into our industry?
The first time I think I really got fully engaged was after graduate school in urban planning and community development. So I was working at the local level with local communities, and at that time
Well, with all your years of experience, obviously, yes.
So, in many instances, I was pretty much out every evening, meeting with local planning boards, selectmen, conservation commissions, city councilors. And it was really exciting. We had a lot of model ordinances to protect wetlands when the state didn't have a very strong wetlands program, trying to manage development around the lakes, trying to clean up the lakes, which was clearly considered an economic resource and not just a natural resource for the communities. And it was a really positive experience for me because I had such a strong base in my career early on in looking through the eyes of local government, getting people to collaborate and work together, agree on their goals, and then figure out how they were going to work to achieve them.
You know, and Bob brings up a great point, the economic well-being that clean water benefits. Again, in New Hampshire, tourism is still one of our major industries. Clean water is critical to the economic well-being of New Hampshire. John, why don't you tell us about those dinner table talks with 3 generations of engineers?
Well, mine was very strange. I had no choice. I had actually, since I was 10 years old, on Saturdays, would travel to different construction sites in the city. So I had the bug of building things. So that was it. By the way, welcome to my fireside chat. I actually started work 5 months before the Clean Water Act was signed into law in October. This city was a pit. This city paid no money for anybody working in the environmental field because we didn't even have an environmental field yet. We haven't figured it out. My salary for the first year was $9,800, in case you wonder why I look so rich. But you could buy a 2-family home for $25,000. So you can play it both ways. I looked around the city, saw old people. They were all veterans. They were all men, by the way. We had no women at all in the engineering field. And I knew they all had to retire or die. So opportunity was there, and I've always looked forward and looked for opportunity. So I stayed there. And it took a while, but this city was terrible. You wouldn't go near the waterfront. But what happened to the whole course of my career is, in '77, we were doing so bad as a water and sewer utility, they dumped us out of the Public Works Department and created an independent Boston Water and Sewer Commission with one goal, and a state law requires that we fix the system, we raise the rates, we make it work. That was huge. A second one that came up was back in 84, 85, when the MWRA was built based on the model we had. There was problems with the MDC. So when I came into the system, it was horrible, but I saw a future. Didn't know if we'd ever get there. You can imagine back in 1977, there were 14 million gallons a day of raw sewage running out the CSO outfall under the aquarium. So as long as you were facing the city, life was pretty good. But at low tide, it was less than good. But you could actually see what the word pollution was. So I got in it early. I had a lot of encouragement. I grew up in the city, and I was determined to make it better. And right now, we are enjoying unbelievable results, mainly because we were forced to. The Clean Water Act is a wonderful thing. NPDES permits, consent decrees, the best thing that was ever invented. People hate them. I love them. Because when you got one, you get the money to do it because they're enforceable.
You know, and that brings up a good point. You know, to prepare for this, we had a conference call, and we were talking about the legal accountability and the positive aspects of it. And Bob and I were just talking, the city of Manchester just entered into a $230 million CSO consent decree, but really is the catalyst for urban revitalization and infrastructure upgrade for the next 20 years. So I'll echo John's conclusions that those consent decrees can be good. Impacts of the Clean Water Act. I'm going to start with you, Bob. Again, more from a regulatory role. As you know, Bob was the leader of the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services for more than a decade, and then the head of Region 1. So he's seen all of the regulatory end. Bob, could you speak a little on that, please?
Sure. As I think many of you in the room know, it was tough going in the beginning. We had direct discharges all over the place. You saw the pictures of the rivers and what we were facing. But fortunately, the passage of the Clean Water Act had money with it. And so that enabled us to very quickly
build that infrastructure that was so critical, the construction of those wastewater treatment plants. And so we elevated our game dramatically in a relatively short period of time. And it's something that we now take for granted. But then, as you know, we also got a lot of bang for the buck. We got a dramatic reduction in pollutants for every dollar that we spent. And now going forward, one of our challenges, of course, is that we get less reduction for more money. And the resources has been something that I think we all need to continue to keep our eye on. The recent passage of legislation and funding is incredible. We have this moment in time now to really catch up and get to where we really should have been about 20 years ago, I think, in terms of funding. And I would also hope that we'll see more states provide funding. As you know, Fred, when I was New Hampshire Commissioner, we were able to I worked with the wastewater industry and the communities, and we were able to put in place a state general fund grant program for wastewater treatment after the federal grant dollars dried up and there was only the SRF program. So we provided funding to municipalities and targeted those that had high rates and were generally underserved, vulnerable, lower income, EJ type cities and towns that really needed help. And to this day, it still floors me that states don't provide more money as they should. And I would urge all of you to try to put some effort into that.
Two quick comments on that. First, a thank you, because that grant program is still in place in the city of Manchester, is still benefiting. And again, that economic theme has been throughout the 50 years of the Clean Water Act. You saw in the video in the Cuyahoga River at that time, I'm sure $100 million seemed like the hugest amount of money, and he knew right away, no, for a regional solution, you need more. Lori, could you weigh in on some perspectives from the legal side, again, on the Clean Water Act that you've seen?
Well, I think, I look at, like, we spent, I don't know, $100 million on nitrogen removal, and that was to get us to 5, right? And now they want to talk to us about 3. I can't even imagine what that would cost, and I'm willing to pay a few million to fight that, because I think the diminishing returns is such a problem. On the flip side, when there were grant programs back in the late 80s and early 90s when we still had money, we were able to build whole new treatment plants and add all new, types of technologies. So that, to me, I'm so happy that we have the WIFIA program now. It looks like the infrastructure bill will provide us with some more funds. In Rhode Island, tourism is also one of our major things. So for us, there's been so many less beach closures over the last few years. We've opened up shellfish beds, which is both tourism, but it's also, working stuff for us, because that's what the lobstermen and the fishermen do in Rhode Island. So that's the plus of it, but like I said, the bad side is now we've got sort of diminishing returns for a lot of money. So I think we need to know when to fight that, right?
Yeah. Now, 2 comments on that. One, a strategy I've seen out my career is that to fight something like that is much more cost effective than implementing $10 or $20 million, especially when it's not based on sound science.
Absolutely.
So it's a critical one. Jeanette, from your end, when I was looking up, I saw how many times she testified in D.C. for funding. So I know she's been an advocate for that.
Yeah, the funding, when you think back to the beginning of the Clean Water Act and the NPDES program, treatment plants were being 90% funded, mostly from federal, but then there was a state contribution. So there was all of these upgrades to secondary treatment because the funding was available. I can think back to the most recent upgrade that we did in Stamford that I was involved with back in the early 2000s, which was more than $100 million, and there was like a 20% grant. So now all of a sudden, all of that, those costs go back to the ratepayers, and the ratepayers are struggling with paying other things. And unfortunately, we haven't done a great job in explaining that funding a wastewater treatment plant to be able to improve the environment is more valuable than cable TV, and we haven't really done that. But the funding is critical. I am so thankful that we have the infrastructure bill now, because that will, as Bob mentioned, we're 20 years behind the time, and catch-up is important. I had an opportunity a few years ago to study about 30 treatment plants in New England, and I can remember going to some of these treatment plants, and they're just, some of them, the headworks especially, and things like that, were just in poor condition because the towns and cities could not afford to upgrade them. And yet, because of really devoted operators, they keep those things moving and working. And so funding is critical. I think we do need to do a better job in getting the message that the environment is really important, and we need to spend money on the environment.
One way we're looking to do that, Jen, in Manchester, is we currently do quarterly bills. We're looking to go to monthly billing so you can compare it to your Comcast and say, geez, I'm paying 10 or 15 bucks for water and sewer. I'm paying 200 bucks for Comcast. Again, to try and put in perspective one of the tools we're trying. John, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, the funding helped us build the interceptors that relieved most of the big problems we had. And we took advantage. We sucked as much money as we possibly could into the capital city. You can't have development, you can't make a modern city without good infrastructure. And that was known, and we were recipients of a ton of money. But on the other hand, as a state, we failed. We failed because we fought secondary treatment. We had a treatment plant. By the way, Deer Island Treatment Plant was first built in 1968. Before that, 1967, if you can imagine how modern that is, we used to pump all the sewage from downtown Boston over to Moon Island and let it go in the outgoing tide, untreated. Well, there was treatment. The grease balls would float in the tanks. So there was that treatment. But we were replacing, we had a 1968 one-time plant. It needed help. We had the opportunity to get the federal funding. We fought it. We fought it tooth and nail. We wanted to get a secondary waiver. We lived on an ocean. That was the problem. We, as a state, as a whole environmental group, we failed. We failed the populace. Because at the end of the day, the Clean Water Act, the consent decree, the federal judge said, you will fix it. We'll make the MWRA. He stopped all building in the city of Boston. For a while in the city of Boston, because we had so much tidal problems with tide gates, we used to build holding tanks under the buildings. And what you did was when the tide was high and the water was coming in, you couldn't put sewage in because it would go overboard. So we'd store it in the buildings. The Long Wharf Marriott still has this gigantic tank underneath it, anchored to the bedrock, that's empty, but it used to be full of sewage, and we had tide clocks. And we would pump like hell when that tide went down, so you get it over the treatment plant. So without the Clean Water Act, the basis of this city, the whole waterfront, the Faneuil Market, all of that was revitalized because we were able to take care of the basic sewer problem. And of course, we jumped on with the water problem, we took care of that, but that's the way it is. So we enjoyed it, and we wish now with the infrastructure bill that all the money would continue to come to the city of Boston. So I just throw that out.
And your laughter reinforces the success of the Clean Water Act. John talks about dumping raw sewage in the tide every day. That's unheard of. Cuyahoga River catching fire 7 times. Unheard of. That's the success of the Clean Water Act. We cleaned all those waterways, stopped those practices in 55 years. An engineering marvel. So those are all good things. How about collateral damage? Anything from the Clean Water Act that we've seen where the pendulum swung too far the other way and hurt us maybe? Bob, you look like you're pondering there.
Yeah, I mean, early on, one of the frustrations was that there wasn't the concept of phasing in improvements over time. It was this hammer down, you're going to agree to everything right now. And as you may recall, with Manchester, we broke some new ground and were able to break it up into phases. Correct. And to take the low-hanging fruit first, the most cost-effective things where we got the biggest environmental bang for the buck, and then after that implementation, develop another plan for phase 2, phase 3, so that things can be done in a way that doesn't bankrupt a community, but ensures that there's continued progress. So that's one thing that was very frustrating early on, and I'm glad that we now have that. And I think there would have been an awful big problem if EPA hadn't done that, and now that I reflect on it. One other little thing I want to mention, for those of you that are in more rural areas, is that I think there was a mistake when the big money was going out to communities for new wastewater treatment plant construction. There should have been a requirement for adequate receiving stations for septage for rural areas, with a requirement that they have to accept that septage as part of the financial aid that they're receiving. Had we done that, we would have avoided a whole bunch of problems, an awful lot of wasted time and effort and posturing that didn't need to happen if they had done that early on.
And that was still going on today. But again, I'm picking up themes here. One I always like is biggest bang for the buck. And again, we look for that for all our projects, looking collectively, biggest bang for the buck. Lori, any thoughts?
On the sort of negative aspects?
Yeah,
of-
well, collateral, things that we don't
Yeah, I
think's
mean,
gonna
one of the
happen,
thing-
and
one
I'm
of the
gonna
things
give an
that I've
example after.
noticed more recently is the thing that I worry about is we're the Providence metro area, right? So we have all the cities and towns, and the benefits of what we do are felt downstream in the coastal communities where there's boaters and there's beach houses and that whole thing. But the people that are paying for that are my people in the metro area that frankly don't have boats, they can barely get to the beach. And to me, that's an environmental justice issue of huge proportions that, now I have no contribution from the feds in terms of money, no contribution from the state. So it's all on them. So these programs that I'm, unfunded mandates that I'm forced to do, that are hundreds and millions of dollars. I mean, my recent CSO project is around $365 million, right? I mean, that's going to be on my ratepayers' backs, but they're not really going to get all the benefits of that. Hopefully it will, we're up a stream, so I'm hoping that we were able to open some actual beaches maybe further up the bay at some point. But in reality, it seems incredibly unfair to me that the people downstream that are really reaping the benefits pay nothing. So that's the argument I try to make to the state all the time. And I think what happens is, like in any political situation, they don't see votes in that, right? So their theory is, well, you can just raise the rates, and that's your issue. And they don't really want to make that contribution. But I'll still keep fighting for it.
But again, a reoccurring industry theme, environmental justice. And I contend that Indian commercial from 1970 was environmental justice back then. Jeanette, collateral damage from Clean Water Act?
So, to me, the Clean Water Act was, like you had mentioned, one of the greatest things that's happened. I think the collateral damage is that there is a fraction of people in the country that don't understand the value of it, and so fight against a lot of environmental regulations. And that's just misinformation or misunderstanding. It's unfortunate that we can't show these kinds of videos to everybody across the United States to give them more of an impression of what the value of this Clean Water Act is, rather than trying to maybe remove some of the protection of it. So I guess the downside is the lack of understanding of the value of it. And of course, it goes down to the finances too. And you brought up a really good point about people that, I remember when I did this study a few years ago, looking at nitrogen removal to benefit Long Island Sound for plants that were up in Vermont. And they'd say, well, why should we spend money? We're not getting the value. And yet, and that's a hard one to judge, but for Rhode Island, there's an economic value to the clean water. For everybody, there's an economic value to the clean water. But it's hard for distressed communities to be, that are impacted by regulations.
John, thoughts?
Well, mine was pretty simple. We had such a horror show when we built all these facilities. The water got better, we celebrated. But we forgot something. Everything wears out. So we still talk about the new Deer Island treatment plant that's 20 years old. I mean, if you got to keep pouring money. To pour money, you got to raise rates. Now you're into politics. And so that's been one of the real horror shows here, is that we really raised the rates on people, really changed what was going on. Remember, a lot of these people weren't in the environmental movement. Most of you are. You grow up with it. That's all you've known, is improving and doing the better thing. We were struggling at the beginning with old people that said water should be free, and I flush, it goes away, life is good. One of the major problems I see coming on us again now is the next part of the Clean Water Act, stormwater. Stormwater is non-point source, it's everywhere, it's pollutant everywhere we do. Trying to get people to understand that they have a responsibility at the source to stop some of these nutrients from getting in the rivers, from getting in the stream. They look at you like you're nuts. They say, you're gonna make me pay for what? When it rains out? And how do you know the pollutants are there? And why me? And why not them? And it goes away. The river runs fast. So that is one of the difficulties we're having, is making sure people understand. But you know what? If you keep plugging at it, the old ones eventually die. And then you got the young ones. So you're all set.
Janet, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. I think one of the problems that I do see with this Clean Water Act is this definition of waters of the United States. And that's still an issue right now. In fact, there's something coming, I think, to the Supreme Court really right around now about this definition of waters of the United States. And probably Bob knows more of the history of how that definition came. But that's one of the downsides, is that the definition has not really been clarified or maybe accepted.
I'm going to build on John's theme of stormwater, and what's our view of the future of the Clean Water Act? We have the future generations of engineers that are going to carry the Clean Water Act for the next 50 years. What do we want them to look out for? Lori, I'm going to put you on the hot seat to start with.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, stormwater is going to be a big issue.
Mic up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Stormwater is obviously going to be a big issue. I don't know. I mean, I think the kids today, I look at my own kids and how involved they are with climate change and marches on that and everything. And I feel like this group of people is going to handle it. Like, I don't want to say everyone's going to die that's old, but, I think we're going to be in a good space in 20 years, because now this generation understands it. They know why it's so important. My kids say to me all the time, well, you know what, Mom, where your plant is right now is going to be underwater in about 50 years. And I was like, well, the good news, I won't be here for that. But, that's a good question, right? Do you move wastewater treatment plants, right? I mean, you can harden all day long, but I mean, if it rises, what are you going to do? Like, we have to think about all those things. But I think the young people are thinking about it. And that's the great thing that I see with the younger people that we're hiring. They are interested in it, and they're dedicated to it, and they're passionate about it. Whereas some of the older people, maybe they weren't. So they saw it more as an engineering feat, than really what it is, which is like more of a holistic watershed approach to things.
Yeah, before I give it to Bob, I'm going to just throw a little grenade in. And one thing I saw as collateral damage is, again, well-minded environmentalist. So now we have detection parts per trillion. We never even thought we could do that, and now we have this. And now we have forever chemicals, that four-letter word PFAS. So as Bob knows, in New Hampshire, we have well-intended legislators to say, well, PFAS is bad for you, so we want zero. They have no idea that's billions of dollars that we don't have the technology. But, again, so I see that as collateral damage. We've been so successful that they expect us to succeed with these forever chemicals that we just found out about a few years ago. But Bob, future Clean Water Act?
Yeah, the thing that runs through my mind, Fred, is that and this is not an engineering concept or anything really, but the issue of storage is critical, whether it's stormwater or wastewater treatment. Many of you probably don't know the collaboration that EPA had with the MWRA, but they were going to put this gigantic facility in South Boston. Everybody was concerned about it. Everybody was upset, yet they had it all entered into the court, and it was, bird in hand, don't mess with it kind of thing. And we took the risk of opening it back up and collaborating and trying to look at the issue and how could we try to deal with the need for storage during more frequent and severe storms. How could we deal with stormwater issues on South Boston beaches where you had a lot of human contact on top of the Mystic and Charles and so on. And the thing that was incredible about that is that we first established after a lot of fighting a level of trust. And we did it right at the highest level where Fred Lasky and I worked together. We met privately. We talked things through. We liked each other, trusted each other, and said we're committed to finding a solution that works for everybody. And so we stayed on that path. One of the things that one of our EPA staff came up with was an unused pipe going across the Charles River that could be used for storage. We then also drilled, as many of you know, the tunnel from Conley Terminal over to across Dorchester Bay, and allowing for slow release and treatment, and also making a major gain on stormwater, going way beyond what the letter of the law required, and making the South Boston beaches the cleanest urban beaches in America. But all of that was based on some simple things relative to storage and some simple things relating to trust and working together and collaborating and avoiding what we see now across this country, which is us and them, and everybody's so fractured and grandstanding on every single issue. And you know, when we did that deal, and it was $750 million deal, there was no backlash, there was no finger pointing, there was all boats float higher, let's all pat each other on the back for doing a good thing and the right thing, but doing it in a way that respected those ratepayers and those people who had limited income.
You know, it just warms my heart and reinforces the success of the Clean Water Act when John talks about all the shit going over the wall, and now Bob's saying, here we are swimming on those same beaches within 50 years. Great accomplishment. Jeanette, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up on Lori. So from the perspective of who's going to protect the environment, and that's the young people. So I teach college seniors and graduate students, and some of the classes are in sustainability. And I listen to what they're saying and what they're thinking, how they're concerned about things. Green infrastructure, especially protecting against stormwater pollution, the respect that they have for the environment, and the realization that if we don't do something for climate change, that we're not going to have any kind of a world. So the future I see is in really good hands with the students. My concern is the politicization of the environment, and depending on who's going to be in leadership roles, are they going to reduce the environmental laws? Are they going to change the Clean Water Act from what it is to what it should not be? So that's my concern about the future.
You know, and just to build off of that, an observation, look at every major corporate in America has gone green. You see any commercial for the Super Bowls and they're touting green this and green that, and now it's hip and cool to be green. But we were hip and cool way before they were. All right, with that, let's end on a fun note, some quick war stories in the trenches in the past 50 years. Bob, anything? I see you laugh immediately.
One of the things about Rhode Island that was always fun for me was that Rhode Island was a designated state for the Clean Water Act for NIPDES, and every so often the legislature would be rattling things and say, we can't afford this, we're going to cut staff, we're going to give the program back to EPA. And this happened 3 times while I was at EPA for 8 or 9 years, with 3 different governors. And so I would march down there, I'd have a meeting with the governor, I'd have a meeting with the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, and my message was very simple. I was there to thank them for returning it to EPA, because that made me in charge, and that enabled me to control economic development in the state of Rhode Island. And what a great thing to be able to do. So thanks for giving me that power. And boy, I'll tell you, they dropped it as fast as you could imagine. So
A unique way of managing. Yeah. Lori?
Well, you know, one of the things I think is interesting now for us is, like, we're doing the CSO project, right? We did the first tunnel, the big tunnel, back in the early 2000s. And when we did that, it was all about the engineering. Like, was it gonna work? You know, how many drills, how many borings did we have to drill? Make sure the geology was okay. Was it safe? Because back in those days, people would, you know, you'd hear like these crazy stats, like you'd lose a man a mile building a tunnel, you know. All these concerns were our concerns in 2000. Fast forward ahead 20 years, and now we're doing our second huge tunnel, and it's all about economic diversity, who's going to pay for this, what are you doing to the neighbors? You know, it's a totally, the engineering is already proven. We already know that we can build the tunnels. We know that they're successful. We know they work. So that's not the issue anymore. The issues are who is going to pay for it, and is it fair that the people that are going to have to pay for it are paying for it? So it's a totally, for me, the experience is totally different now than it was then. Now, given that I was also the attorney for the agency then, so it was a little bit different. But nevertheless, I mean, that's the big change that I've seen.
Yeah. No, and to build on that, again, expectations. The first tunnel is an engineering marvel. Now it's old hat, or we could do that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Jeanette, war stories from your perspective?
I just, not necessarily a war story, but a reflection. And so when the coastal areas of Connecticut were all secondary, became all secondary treatment, the fact that all of a sudden you could go down to the beaches, any of the beaches along the Connecticut coast, and you could look at the water and it was clean, and you saw people fishing there, and you talked to some of the old timers that were fishing there and said, you know, we couldn't catch fish for anything, and now there's all these fish. So it's not really a war story, but just an observation on the effect that the initial construction grants program, initially going to secondary treatment, the public recognized it, and that goes to the business now of, you know, these, that was the low-hanging fruit, and now if you remove PFAS, nobody's going to notice.
No, but that was the reflection I shared, my personal experience with the Merrimack River. And I'm so proud of that, and I share that with everyone, because literally you could not swim in that river in my youth. John, we know you're always good for a war story.
Well, I have years of war stories, but I think the biggest problem was you need perseverance to get to the public, to almost teach them what they needed. We needed to build a city. Walk down the waterfront, go over the seaport where they have $1 billion worth of buildings down there. Anywhere in our waterfront, the vitality of the city, all was because of perseverance of telling the people we would like to have some more of your money. And that has been a struggle and a half for us. We had protests, we had everything. We had a rate increase this year of 4.5%. We lost a lot of money, people aren't using enough water. And as a quick aside, for all of you staying in this hotel, it is metered. You can run that shower for as long as you want. We have plenty of water. But what's really, really important here is that we need to keep going forward, proper level, to take care of the problem. We can't say, well, the rates are too high. We can't do that. But we fought and fought and fought. And I was in plenty of meetings where I've been cursed out. It's kind of like coming home late at night. Same thing. You're not going to win it. You just put up with it and off you go. But I think that's the biggest problem that all of us have. We're getting to a point where a lot of us can afford these higher water rates, but there's a water affordability problem that we're all talking about, and not a lot of us are doing a lot about it. And so that's one of the biggest problems I see right now. It's a continual war. We need to pay for this. We need to keep it good. We've got excellent people coming up behind us, Larry says. And they'll take over. They're going to do the right thing. We still need to pay for it, and we have so many competing interests in the money.
No, and it comes back, again, the original video. We need the money to do our work. Well, I want to thank our panelists. I'm going to open up for questions, but before I do, I need to give a plug to the summer issue of the Journal. The focal point is going to be celebrating 50 years of the Clean Water Act. Yes, yes. We have Andrew Goldberg in the audience. He just joined the committee. He's looking for contributions to the Summer Journal. I'll pledge to do one. I hope some other people in this room will pledge to support that. And with that, we'll be glad to take any questions from the crowd. Jeanette, I'll let you go first.
Yep, let me start. So that's a really good question. And so one of the courses I teach, one of the graduate courses, we do a few weeks on source separation, urine separation, gray water separation. We talk a lot about centralized treatment and decentralized treatment. Part of the problem that I see is in established cities and communities, the infrastructure is there. If we start to go to some type of a distributed type system, we're wasting some of the investment that we've already have. Even with source separation, when you look at like urine, which contains most of the nitrogen, if we separated that out, what would be the impact on some of our treatment plants? Where I see it of value is communities that are just developing. When there's new developments, this is where we need to implement things like source separation or distributed treatment, because that has the least cost in doing it. Water reuse, going to purple pipe systems. These are becoming common in states like Arizona and Nevada, where there's a lot of new development outside of where the source shed is. So I see I see a role for it. It's just I can't think of like how you would do it in Boston or New York City or places like that, where everything's in place right now.
I was going to say, in Rhode Island, we actually do have tons of municipal wastewater treatment facilities. All the places that are down on the coast in the southern part of the state, they're all separate systems. But I think in an area like Metro Providence, which is what we have, right? We have, I think, 10 cities and towns that all pour into us. There's no land. It's all tight. We're the best answer. I mean, I don't know how else you could do that. There's just not the room to do it, actually. And plus, people don't want to take up valuable space where the waterfront is, right? So we already take up a lot of space on waterfront, and people are annoyed about that. But you don't want to take up more of that. But just because of the underground infrastructure that already exists in the piping, I can't even imagine how you would separate that out in a very tight metro area. But it definitely has a place in the cities and towns that are outside that metro area. And I know in Rhode Island we do a very good job of that. Lots of our cities and towns have separate wastewater and water facilities.
Any other questions? Yes, over here.
Well, I'll start by saying thank you to all of you for your years of being champions for clean water. I mean, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. My question is, if you had a crystal ball and you look at the Clean Water Act 50 years ago and what could have been done differently, things that were in it shouldn't have been in it, that could have made us more effective than what we have done with improving our water. That's not to say we didn't do amazing things, but are there things that you see that could have been done differently? So when we maybe open it up and try to fix it, or the next 50 years of the Clean Water Act, I'll give the example of the ag exemption. I think that is a good example of something that should have been in there that could have made us more effective in protecting our water sources. So, thank you.
Well,
John?
my feeling on the Clean Water Act is we were in such a mess, we needed that good hammer. So I think everything that was in there, don't forget, we ignored stormwater to the very end. I would have liked to see us a little smarter when we first started doing this, worrying about CSOs. What we did was we built bigger interceptors, but let them still go over saying, well, that's dilute sewage, so that's okay, that's not bad. So that could have been a little better planned. But when you got raw sewage running out of a city, you fix that problem. I think now we're smarter, and we need to sit down and look at the Clean Water Act, because you're going to get one more bite at the apple, maybe. That's, of course, depends how you all vote. But we'll get one more bite at it, but we got to decide what is important to us. And I don't think we've decided that yet. We've had these discussions, but we have not concluded as a group. What is important? Where do we want to go? What level of treatment is enough? Is 90% okay? And when you were in high school, that was the best thing you ever heard was 90%. You know, does it have to be 98? Does it have to be 100? You never get to 100. So what is the burden that's going to be to get that? So that's a debate we have to have, and I don't think we've had those discussions deep enough.
Wait, please.
I think that one of the things that has happened that's different from years ago, so 30-something years ago when I was, a young lawyer, I was coming up to EPA because we were being fined for different things at our plant, right? And I was making those arguments about why they shouldn't fine us. I will say, the relationship that I have now with the EPA, with people at the top of the DEM, with the Rhode Island DEM, which is, a designated state, I mean, I can call them up, I can text them at 10 o'clock at night and say, look, we just had this problem, you got to help us out here, blah, blah, blah. Much, much different relationships than we had 30 years ago, where it was just the hammer. But I agree, it needed to be the hammer back then, because I don't think everything would have gotten done. But I think now, even the people that are at the top of the EPA and the top of the state delegations, I think they realize that the partnership piece works better. So in terms of, I don't know that you really legislate that, but I think it's definitely been seen, and now it's being done, and it works out much better for all of us. And, I have some of my staff is here as well. They also have relationships with people at DEM that they can just call up and say, look, this just happened this morning, before we get to fining and arguing. And that doesn't mean that they don't still fine us or we don't end up in court. Sometimes we do, but it's a much more of a partnership relationship than it was 30 years ago, for sure.
Okay. There's no other questions? Well, one more, because again, I'm always about being on schedule, on budget. It's 12:01, but we'll go one more.
It's all right. I appreciate all the comments you made. I'm in the same age bracket as you. We've lived it. Maybe for the younger folks, it seems a little odd because, why would you not do this? Well, yeah, it was hard. We've come a long way. I think I probably would have titled it "A Job Well Started." So
Okay.
I'm not sure we're done yet. Point sources, we're looking pretty good.
Yes.
Non-point sources, we got problems. Is because the Clean Water Act was never set up to deal with that. I mean, it's a lawyer's trick that we're able to manage stormwater because it comes out of the pipe. It's not real. It's an issue. I guess I've always told people environmental management is a combination of science, economics, and institutions. And the institutions include public perception, the political side, the regulatory side, the whole routine. I'd like your reaction to the statement that, well, the science lagged initially. When the hammer came down, it got gear. We had a whole hallway full of exhibitors doing cool stuff. Science is way ahead now. Economics are an issue, as you've all pointed out. We get back more than we put in when we do it right. It leaves us to the institutions, which people have been saying for years are inadequate, and I'm afraid they still are. What do we need to do better?
Bob?
Well, I'll just take an initial crack at that, and that is that it's all about the public. It's all about engaging the public, getting them to connect to the resource that we're trying to protect, getting them to understand the trade-offs and the challenges that we have. While I was EPA Regional Administrator, we had a series of sessions. I think, Jeanette, I remember you being at one in Connecticut, where we were talking about this very issue, and it was the mayor of Connecticut at the time who became governor, and
Yes,
now
Devil,
is
yeah.
up in Maine and head of the university up there. But I remember him saying, you people do a terrible job of promoting your needs and educating the public and getting them engaged. You really need to step up the game. And even things as simple as every kid growing up and going to school should have a day in a canoe or a kayak on a river. Every kid should get out onto the ocean and see what's going on out there. And you're not going to be passionate about things that seem abstract and you're not intimately connected with. And so making those connections, I think, is really critical. It's not just about technology. It's not just about educational courses. We have all that is great, but it's more that human element and getting people engaged and involved, and then holding our political leaders' feet to the fire to say, this is what we the people want, and you need to deliver.
Well said. And on that, I think we'll close the session. Another big hand for our presenters and for everything they've done over the past 50 years for the Clean Water Act. Thank you.